This week, I was joined by Cesar Cobo, who is the director of our agency Web Versus Operations. He's also probably one of the smartest SEO people that I know, and he stopped by our live session this week to talk about why your website is losing organic traffic. And what Cesar broke down and presented to us is his framework to deciphering why and then what exactly is happening. And he presents this to us in two parts. First, he put together a slide deck that's got 8 different reasons for what potentially might be happening, from an algorithm change to just a shift in how Google is ranking and indexing different properties or competitors. And then he goes into a little bit more technical analysis in a spreadsheet where he actually pulls keyword ranking data from SEMrush and compares that period over period to really understand what is happening with a website. So we give you both these templates only if you're a full Blueprint member. If you guys want access to them, of course, you got to join the full Blueprint. And of course, if you guys want to see these episodes live every week, you got to make sure you join our Slack group, which is completely free, or our Facebook group, which is completely free. That way you can tune in and ask questions and maybe get any sort of things answered that you need to figure out why your website is losing traffic. With that being said, let's get into this week's episode.
The first thing, it's pretty obvious, but when looking at a site's historical traffic, the first thing is if you're seeing traffic either increasing or decreasing is determining whether or not well, in the case that it's losing traffic, if it's related to anything technical, for example, the actual analytics tracking, if that's what you're using. And this could be something that can happen during some sort of a migration or a website redesign. These are just some points that would fall under the technical reasons for traffic loss. Would be a mishandling of things like redirects, canonicals, no index tags, robots directives. Basically, if you're seeing that or you're unsure, using something like Google Search Console, popping that the page in there that has lost a lot of traffic, and just seeing how Google is able to crawl it, if it is in fact indexable, if it's indexed, all of that stuff you can get at a page level inside of Google Search Console. And you can also run a crawl of the site to look for any sort of technical errors that could be an explanation for why traffic is suddenly dropping. Other things, this is more to do with content specific issues. So if you have duplicate content on the actual site, so having cannibalization, multiple pages that are competing for the same keyword, or if you're syndicating content. I've seen this happen with sites that are not very authoritative, but they're part of their marketing strategy is publishing the content on their site, but then also syndicating that on a more authoritative website. And if Google is not really crawling the original site and indexing that content before it does the site where they're syndicating it, then you could either lose your rankings, which is something that I saw recently. Page was ranking, I think it was like position 2 or 3, and then all of a sudden it dropped out. And lo and behold, the page that was now taking its spot was where they syndicated the content. I can't remember the exact site, but it's a popular site. And we ended up taking down that post from that syndicated site. And after some time, his original page was back ranking to where it was. So something like that is probably not all that common, but it can happen. The best way to check for that is if you have a page that was ranking very well before and inexplicably it's not ranking anymore, you could just copy a snippet of text from that page, put it inside of Google search in quotes, and see what comes up. If you're seeing the same content on other websites, then in this case, it was because it was purposely being syndicated, but it could be a case of maybe someone is scraping your content and publishing it on their site. Analytics tracking code errors, that's something I mentioned before. If you relaunch a site, or if you redirect, you migrate and you don't copy over the tracking code on every page, obviously that could cause problems. And then major changes to the content, stuff like if you change page titles, if you do some sort of a redesign and you change the website architecture, that could also be an issue. And then how to prevent this stuff, or at least how to stay ahead of it, is just having a constant crawl of your site and having some sort of a health check set up where you're at least checking it once a month and looking for things like this here, where any changes in sort of like technical issues that most of these tools that crawl your sites will tell you if you have X amount of redirects or broken pages and things of that nature. So just keeping tabs on it, whether it's your site or if you're doing it for a client. We run this on a monthly basis, so we could usually be ahead of any sort of technical problems. And then of course, if you are doing a redesign or you're relaunching or you're migrating, set up a staging environment and make sure you run a crawl of the staging site before you push everything live. Just check all the boxes, because once you do push it live, it could take you a few days to catch if there was a major problem where you're losing traffic. And if you don't catch it right away, then this could obviously be a major problem if it goes weeks or months before it actually gets caught. So that's the first thing, is really determining whether or not this is a technical issue or whether it's something to do with Google and the change to the SERP. So another thing is, when you're looking in analytics, is understanding user behavior. Something like seasonal traffic to an e-commerce site, certain service industries that have these ebbs and flows of traffic depending on the time of year that it is. When you're looking in analytics, you want to at least go, if possible, if you do have that historical data, go back at least 3 to 5 years, just so you can see if you spot any sort of common trends at certain points of the year that can explain if they're in the middle of one of those downturns. Then that could be a place to start. Maybe there really isn't a problem, they're just not aware that they have seasonal traffic, and all of a sudden they are aware of it and don't know that that's happening. Just mentioned here that, so keyword, you want to definitely look in analytics, because keyword tools like SEMrush or Ahrefs, they don't account for this sort of seasonality type of traffic. So they're just looking at where you're ranking in the search volume, and it's not always going to be that amount of search volume every month consistently. I already mentioned this, get a good size look back window. And then if this is the case, where you have this sort of seasonality, the way that you want to combat that is to try to come up with a way of diversifying the content. So looking for ways of this is obviously easily solved with content marketing, creating evergreen content that isn't really something that people are just going to be looking for at a certain time of year, if that's possible. In some cases that may not be possible, but that's an obvious solution to that sort of a problem. Another thing you can look at is things like Google Trends. So this is a screenshot here where if you just take the term protein shake, or just about anything that has to do with fitness or working out or that sort of thing, you're going to see this thing here, where January, beginning of the year, everyone is working on the New Year's resolution, getting in shape, all that stuff. So it's, this is pretty common, or it makes sense that you would see a spike in something like protein shakes in the beginning of the year, and then, spiking or coming down and then spiking back up, and so on. So another place you want to look for in analytics is your audience reports. So things like device and your demographics reports are going to tell you a lot about your audience. So if you are seeing that decline, look to see if it's device specific, because maybe then you have an issue where perhaps people were finding you more on desktop, and now it's become more of a mobile search. And that lets you know that maybe you need to start optimizing your website and your content for mobile first. Moving on to the next thing here is an algorithmic update. So this is probably going to be the more common reason, especially when you see something that's prolonged over time. So the thing with the algorithm updates now is that they roll out periodically throughout the year. And then some of them cause subtle changes, some of them cause major changes. And also the big challenge is that they're not all officially announced or recognized by Google. So there's a lot of these sites. This is just a screenshot. This is from Rank Risk, but there's a lot of these sites that they just spend a bunch of time just constantly looking at the SERP, and they're on top of any sort of a major change, and they'll make the announcement. Sometimes Google will in fact confirm it, or say, yes, we did have a big change, or some sort of tweak to the algorithm and what it covers, but a lot of times they don't, and we just kind of have to infer what it is just based off of anecdotal data that we get. And so it could be niche specific or industry. An example of this was the medic update that affected a lot of sites that were talking about medically related topics. We're actually working with an affiliate marketing site that kind of came to us with the same question as to, like, what happened here? I was getting all this traffic. Lo and behold, if we look at the keywords that they were ranking for at the time, and you do a search now for that, it's just covered with sites like WebMD or Healthline, or those very high authoritative medical sites. So for some of those keywords, there's really no coming back. And that's another thing that I mentioned here, is that in some cases, there's nothing you can do to fix it, or it's not anything you can easily fix. You may have to completely re-innovate the type of content and how the actual pages are created, as far as, in this particular case, if we're talking about medical stuff, are the people that are writing these blog posts, let's say, do they have the credibility to be writing about that? And if they don't, then you either need to get people in there that do, or shift to topics that are not so medically heavy that you would fall victim to the algorithm update. And also,
Caesar, real quick on that. Sorry, I didn't mean. I know you're on a roll. Didn't mean to cut you off. But when that happens, it can be tough dealing with clients like that, right? Because I know which client you're talking about. I know they've been very flexible and very, willing to take our advice because they just want to get their traffic back. Yeah. But how do you broach that conversation with a client? Like you alluded to, that traffic's not coming back. How do you broach that conversation? How do you communicate that properly to a client to let them know that? And then also, I think you're about to go into it, but how do you kind of pivot their content strategy so you can recoup that traffic with topics that they should be talking about?
Yeah. So the best way, I think, to break that news, because obviously that isn't good news and no one wants to hear that, but it's to have the data to back it up. And later on, I'm going to actually go into the insight, like how we would write insights to show that, listen, we're not just making this up, or this isn't a gut feeling or anything. This is actual data that we did the research, and it's not going to make sense to continue to try to beat a dead horse if you're not going to get anywhere. So our recommendation is, let's find a way to pivot the content that we are creating in a way that we do have a chance at competing for. So I would first start with taking a look at what are the pages and what are the keywords and just the general topics that didn't lose so much visibility, because rarely, unless it's a penalty, unless it's a site-wide penalty, is a website going to just tank. You're going to have some pages that are top heavy, that were accounting for most of the traffic, that you can spot, and you can say, okay, yeah, clearly these are the pages that lost the most amount of traffic. Clearly these were the keywords that they were ranking for and that they no longer are ranking for. And now you can start evaluating what the current landscape, what the current SERP looks like, and you can start coming up with explanations as to why, and then determine what you can do about it. Another thing you want to do is just take a look at competitors, and most of the time, clients are going to tell you who their competitors are. They're usually keeping tabs on similar sites to theirs or competitors, and they'll tell you, hey, you know, I lost all this traffic, but why didn't so and so lose their traffic? You know, and then you can start looking at their site and start getting ideas and just seeing where the differences are. There may be some things that you can sort of emulate and copy and try to get them back on track, but it all depends if they really are a similar type of site to theirs, or if it's just a site that talks about similar things or sells similar products. So SERP volatility, once you've eliminated that it's a technical thing or that it's not an algorithmic thing, then it could just be that there's new competitors that are coming into the market. And especially if it's a site that isn't continuously updating their content, eventually stuff gets old, stuff gets stale, and other competitors come in with better content or refresh content. And eventually you could start losing your rankings. So if you're looking at a site that, you know, maybe they worked their way up to a certain point and then just didn't do anything for a long time, then you can start to see that decline. And it's usually not going to be like a massive drop, but it's more of a slow and steady decline. And then you can use a tool. I think this is Ahrefs here. I think SEMrush has something similar that you just pop in a keyword and it gives you a snapshot of what the SERP looked like. Something like this would tell you that it's a very volatile SERP. You can see these sites are just popping in there from out of nowhere. And if the site that you're working with, your client is not one of these sites, then you can start to see, all right, well, this is what happened. You know, you were ranking at this position, but now all of a sudden, you know, these sites have taken over. So it's easy to spot. Could be related to competitors, and it also could be related to Google. And by that, I mean that the intent behind the keyword may have changed. And maybe before, if your site was ranking with, say, a product page, but now mostly the pages that you see when you do a search for that keyword is blog posts or heavy content pages, and you know that you just don't have the right type of content to rank for the intent behind those keywords. So really the thing is to strategize accordingly. If it is competition, doing something like a website quality audit, just starting with your site first, identifying what are the pages that should be updated, redirected, deprecated, you know, just an overall assessment of the quality of the site itself, especially if it's a site that hasn't really done anything for a long time, or pages have gone a very long time and the content gets old and outdated. Another thing is running a competitor analysis. Then again, going back and looking at competitors, see what's working, what isn't, and then coming up with the theory as to why. And if it's Google, then it's, as I mentioned, trying to match the type of page that you're trying to rank with what you're seeing in the search result. And in a case where maybe it's the SERP itself, the layout has changed, where, you know, maybe there's a featured snippet or something like that, you can try to reverse engineer. Usually it has to do with how the page is laid out, how the content is presented. So things like using tables, using lists, making your content more skimmable will improve your chances of capturing that featured snippet. Another thing I think I may have overlooked it, but is things like changes to how Google is treating the stuff that is above the fold in organic. An example of that is before you could rank in both the featured snippet, and you can have that same page listed in the organic listings as well. That no longer is the case. So if you're ranking for that featured snippet, you're not going to be listed as well in the organic listings. So depending on where you were positioned there, that could also impact your traffic. And this obviously would be at a page level, but if you have multiple pages, and these were the pages that were accounting for the most traffic, that those are the kinds of changes that you need to look at to start putting together a good reason as to why the traffic is dropping. Okay, so I think I may have skipped one here. This is like probably the most obvious one, which is a website penalty. I don't really have access to any sites right now that have a penalty, which I guess is a good thing. But
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this is, you just go into your search console. It's pretty clear right here, manual actions. If you see this, you're good. What you may see is there are different kinds of penalties. Mostly the more common one has to do with things like links, unnatural or spammy links. And it could be specific to certain pages, or it could be site-wide, and it'll tell you in the message that you get whether it's specific or site-wide. If it's something like because of backlinks or because of spammy links, then you would want to do something like a disavow and then submit a reconsideration request. The few times that I've had to do this, it's kind of been all over the place. Usually it's been fast, like within a few days that I submitted the reconsideration request and it was approved and the penalty was lifted. But there's a case that I remember that it took forever. It took like 2 months, and it was like the client always kept checking and asking what's going on, and it's like you just kind of have to wait. That was probably like 2 years ago, so I don't know if maybe Google has gotten better at that, but just if you ever need to do that, or if you're in the midst of doing that right now, just keep in mind that I've seen it where it takes over a month. All right, so that was the theory, I guess, part of it.
That was basically the why. Do you guys have any questions on that? Anyone asking? Basically, he just ran through somewhat. I mean, I would basically call that the checklist, right? That's kind of your decision tree to understand, to identify the why, right? Now you've got a little template to show a little bit more behind the scenes on the how, correct?
Yeah, exactly. This is going through what are the possibilities for this, whether it's technical or whether it's algorithmic or competitors.
And also too, there was a question about getting access to this for Full Blueprint members. I'll be posting this video along with this template. And this is actually a template that the exact same deck that we've delivered to this client. Actually, when we signed them, they had a massive drop in traffic. This was the first deliverable that we did for them. There's also, Caesar just jot down a couple slides so they can just see what else is going on here. Basically, what else you get access to is just kind of some of the descriptions in terms of actually explaining to them what exactly was happening and dissecting that. We don't have to go through this now. The Blueprint members can actually review this when they get access to the deck. You want to pull up in the spreadsheet now, Caesar?
So this is just the data part of it here. And so this is already eliminating the other possibilities, and we knew that it wasn't due to some sort of analytics tracking code or anything like that. It wasn't a technical issue. So now what we did here was we're showing the time period, and the way that we do it is we take the highest point and then we match it to where, in this case, traffic was already going up. We did the comparison to October, but we just as easily could have done it to August. So basically you're taking the peak time period to where it bottomed out, and then doing a comparison of traffic and keywords. So that's what this is here, where you're just basically taking the data from analytics, organic traffic, of course, and then bringing it into something like Sheets or Excel spreadsheet, doing a comparison over the 2 time periods, and then having the difference. So clearly you can see here that this was really 8 pages that accounted for most of the traffic loss. And obviously this first one here accounted for the lion's share of all traffic loss. And then this is stuff that would be pretty familiar if you have the website quality audit template, things like the main keyword and the best keyword. This is just for that specific time frame. So for January, what was the main keyword or what was the best keyword? We do the same thing for October. And then we add this here, which is more of looking at the overall visibility or the keyword stemming of a page. So how many keywords were ranking in the top 50? What was the search volume for that? And then more importantly, because these would be the keywords that most likely would be driving traffic to the site, are the keywords that are in the top 10 and the search volume for that. And we just present this in a pivot table here. Do the same thing for, in this case, October being the current time period that we're measuring it to. And then looking at the difference. So here we can see the difference in keywords in the top 50 is 658. If we're looking at just the keywords that are in the top 10, let me move this out of the way. So it's clearly correlating to what we're seeing with traffic. A major loss like this in over 100 keywords being lost, and search volume, you can see here what that equates to. It's no surprise that this is what's happening with their traffic. So once we do that, we also bring in just a list. In this case, this is from SEMrush, list of keywords and pages. So if you wanted to filter for a specific page, you could just use the filter here and look at just that specific page, look and see the difference between the keywords, where it was ranking in, say, in January versus October. And then once we have all this information, then we can go into, we do the summary here, but then for each individual page, in this case, we knew that it was really just these pages here accounted for the most traffic. This could be just natural stuff here. Like some pages are going to lose a little bit and gain a little bit, but stuff like this it's something obvious, right? So here we go into the reason as to why, and this really just turned out to be, if you see here in the summary, we ruled out that it was a penalty or algorithmic update, and it was more centered around the search intent, and we needed to update those pages because the keywords that they were ranking for before, they weren't ranking for those pages. They weren't even on the first page for some of those keywords, and the content that they used to, for the keywords that they used to rank really well for, was totally different than the pages that they had now. So it was pretty clear what we needed to do there. And I guess this is something you can take a look at as well. We could leave a link to it, but it's really not any sort of like rocket science. It's more about just getting the data into a spreadsheet and doing a comparison. And usually it'll be pretty clear, pretty obvious what are the problematic pages. This is a small site, but if you are working with a bigger site and you do have something like the different pages are, say you have content groupings, for example, that you're sending into analytics, then maybe you don't have to do it for the entire site. If it's obvious that it's only a specific segment or specific type of pages that we're losing traffic, then you can just pull those pages, and you don't have to try to run it for I don't know, thousands of pages if you're working with a really big site.
Caesar, jump back to the deck. Just go back to the beginning of the deck that you had. So I just want to run through this to put a little bit more context to it, especially for this case study. So go back to the first slide. So as you're going through this process, right? Let's say you're getting a prospect or a new client signs up, and they're clearly losing traffic, right? There's and you kind of alluded to it, but there's different scenarios in which they're losing traffic, right? It's either going to be it's going to fall off a cliff. It's going to be that steady shed, that steady decline. So are you looking at, is the first thing that you're looking at the type of traffic loss to then determine what your next step would be? For example, I would imagine that if it falls off a cliff, you're probably going to think that is either like a botched redirect or like a penalty, right? So do you start your analysis based on the type of based on like what you see happening with the traffic?
Yeah, the first thing is when you're looking at the traffic pattern is taking a look at the visibility as well and seeing does it make sense. Whether you're using a tool like Ahrefs or Search Console, if you're not seeing that correlation between keyword rankings and the traffic pattern, then it's probably something to do with the tracking code, because if you're not losing visibility, then you shouldn't be losing traffic, or at least not losing a large percentage of traffic. So that's the first thing, is just identifying, ruling out that it isn't a tracking error. Then it's okay. Did you do a migration? Did you do a redesign? Was it annotated in, maybe it is, maybe it isn't annotated in Google Analytics? And then if the drop coincides with the time that there was a redirect or that there was a redesign or that the site was migrated, then that would be where my suspicion would be. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, that's definitely it, but at least I know that that's a good place to start.
So are you kind of, again, using this as kind of like a high level checklist guide to kind of formulate some thoughts, or are you going right to pulling the data and then looking at the data to kind of like figure out what it's good? Like, which comes first, the data pulling in spreadsheets, or just kind of like looking at front end data, like analytics tools, trends, etc.?
No, first thing is starting with analytics. Like I said, making sure that it makes sense. And then once I know that it's not any sort of a tracking thing, then the next thing would be pulling the data, getting into something like this where I can easily sort and determine what are the problematic pages, and then taking a look at the keywords, especially the keyword changes in the top 10. If that makes sense, if it's lining up with what I'm seeing in terms of sessions is concerned, then I can go into say something like the keyword list and do a comparison. What were the keywords? I would just do something as simple as sorting by the highest search volume, and then grabbing a keyword that was in the highest when traffic was up. Where was it ranking, and where is it ranking in comparison to now, right? And then this part of it here, there just isn't any way around it. Like to come up with an explanation, like it's all manual. You're gonna have to go in. There really isn't any way of like automating that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the more time consuming part of it, is to really study what the SERP looks like now versus what it looked like when they were ranking higher. And it takes time, but it's usually pretty clear to come up with what the reason is.
Yeah, when prospects will usually ask me, about why they're losing traffic, and I'll usually point to it's kind of similar to like a working out analogy, where even if you're doing it, like you might like doing SEO or working out, like you might just not be working out hard enough, or you might not be doing it right. Like you might be doing bicep curls backwards, and that's why you're not getting bigger biceps. You know what I'm saying? Is that it so much doesn't necessarily just depend on it's a combination of both, right? It's not just what you're doing, it's what others are doing. But if others are doing a better job than you, or they're running faster than you, then it's just natural that you're just not going to get as much traffic. And also just the level of competition now in terms of the SERPs is always shrinking, right? There's more ads, there's more knowledge panels, there's just a lot more noise. So, I think that's one of the things that you alluded to, but I think that we could expand on that even more, is just it's very simply like taking the keyword that you're looking for and putting into Google and just seeing what's happening. And if there's like all sorts of shit happening and flying around in ads and, also too, just, when you say algorithmically, it's not just kind of like, hey, Google released Penguin version 5.0 and it just exploded the internet. It's also just algorithmically, like Google might not want to rank your website anymore. They might want to rank like a Yelp listing or like a TripAdvisor type listing, right? I mean, just the nature of what the algorithm wants to rank in terms of the intent, in terms of what's best for the searcher, that is ultimately going to be dictated by the algorithm. There's certain things that we just can't do. You talked about a little bit with our supplement client, the affiliate website, that like over time things change, and you've just got to continuously adapt and understand what that is. And especially for you all in the blueprint watching this, like it's so critical that the analysis is super important, but also the ability to communicate this to clients effectively is equally as important, right? Because a client will come to you with certain expectations, and you absolutely have to be able to communicate to them not just what's happening, but also coming up with a strategy and talking them through that strategy. That's probably not going to be what they want, right? Like, if a company comes to you and they're like, I want to rank first for Viagra alternatives, it's like, oh, it just might not happen, right? But understanding what the other doors are and the other opportunities that you can walk them through to still get them that traffic and more is really what you're getting paid for, not just the doing, but also the ability to communicate it. It's incredibly effective, especially around topics like these, where it's a little bit sensitive when we're talking about their business, when we're talking about their business going down, especially if they've been entrenched in these rankings for years and now they're losing it. They're going to be stressed and they're going to be on edge a little bit, and they're going to be defensive. So it's critically important that you understand, again, how to do it, also how to communicate it. And a lot of that communication comes from what Cesar's showing you now. Like, it's really hard to argue with data. If you can clearly show them that it's just like the keywords that they're targeting are just not a good fit for them anymore, and you can keep targeting them, but ultimately, we need to pivot your strategy a little bit to go after more content-based keywords, right? Or to maybe rank like a door. So just different strategies that you can have in your pocket to talk the client through it. It's a difference between a 3-month contract and a 3-year contract, essentially, right? It's that level of communication for sure. So do you guys have any questions? Ray, I saw that you raised your hand here. I don't know if that was accidental. If you have any questions, just hit the Q&A button below. If not, we're going to wrap this up. Cesar, was there anything else that you had on your plate that you wanted to talk about in regards to the traffic loss analysis?
Not really. I would just suggest that if someone is coming to you specifically for this, if it's ultimately what they're going to hire you for, and because this isn't always the case where you're able to get analytics access up front, it's definitely something that you're going to want to be able to look under the hood, right? So just get all the access that you need to run a very in-depth and robust analysis. Don't just rely on what they're telling you or what they think it is, or something like a third-party tool, because if you commit to it and then afterwards you see it and you get access to analytics and you see that it's another reason for what initially you thought, then the plan that you had initially may not be the right way forward. So I guess that would be the only additional suggestion that I had.
Absolutely. So there's no more questions. So just wrap this up by just noting that we'll be uploading. I'm going to hack this video up into 2 parts. I think the first part that Cesar talked about was the what and the why. The second part is a little bit more on the how in terms of pulling the data, manipulating that spreadsheet. We'll be posting both this slide deck that Cesar put together that we use for our clients, and also the spreadsheet analysis. Very simple what Cesar put together. It's really just a matter of pulling different data points and then just using pivot tables to crosswalk that data and understand which pages are losing traffic. And then again, using these slides that he put together to try and decipher the why, and then effectively communicate that with a couple of slides, and then ideally a phone call with the client to handhold through this process that, like I said, can be very stressful and also very sensitive for clients, because we're talking about a loss in revenue here, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the client that you're working with. So as always, guys, appreciate you guys joining us. Caesar, appreciate your time putting this together and coming on to present this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if since we are going to be sharing the spreadsheet, if anyone has questions about like the formulas that I used or whatever, like to put it together, just I'm in the Blueprint Slack, so you could just message me.
Yeah, we'll probably have to get you put together a Loom video or something for that, just to upload it with this. But as always, guys, appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week. Take care, guys.